stop what you're doing now and go change this Windows setting. Not literally, but the next time you're at your computer, this is a setting you probably want to change. It was added in the latest Windows update. Technically, it's not a new setting and feature. However, you probably were not able to enable it before. It's called Smart App Control, and the way it works, it's a security feature, and I'll go into detail a little bit more about it later, but the reason you couldn't enable it before is because it required you to only be able to enable it upon a fresh install of Windows. And after a certain amount of time, it would switch from initially being evaluation mode to probably turning off by default. And then once it was off, you were never able to turn it on. And if you had it on and you turned it off, you were not able to turn it back on. But now that has changed. With the latest Windows update, which is 26200.8246, and you can check this by going to Start menu and searching WinVer, short for Windows version, and it'll tell you. And you can get to the feature by simply searching the Start menu for Smart App Control. It should come up, or you can go into the Windows Security Settings or menu, search for that, and then go to App and Browser Control, and then go to Smart App Control Settings. And if it's off, just turn it on. There's no reason not to turn it on at this point. As for what this actually does, like I said, it's a security feature, and it greatly improves the security of your computer and prevents running malicious software accidentally. But the best way to think of it is normally how most computers work, like Windows, is even with the antivirus enabled and with the reputation settings on, your computer typically operates in a innocent until proven guilty type framework, where if you run some program or app and Windows doesn't recognize it as known to be bad, like a virus, or it doesn't do anything immediately obvious as malicious, it'll just let it run. But the thing is that a lot of malware these days, hackers just put it up and don't really intend for it to be around that long. They might put it on some link and it's a custom build of it, and they only expect maybe a handful of people to download it, get infected, and then maybe it'll be detected, and then they just spin up another domain with another version of it, and then that version's not detected, and it infects another maybe couple hundred people, and then they just repeat it. They don't necessarily care that it gets detected. It's all about getting people infected before it's detected. So just going based off of is this thing known to be bad is not necessarily most secure. So what Smart App Control does is kind of shifts the whole framework and philosophy to a guilty until proven innocent framework. And it's all based around Microsoft's Smart Screen technology. And the way they do this is because Microsoft has so many users of Windows and they have telemetry, which does some anonymous collecting of certain data about how apps run and what they do, that they can get a pretty good idea after a little while of so many users running some particular app, whether or not it's malicious or not. They can get pretty confident and say, okay, we've seen what this app does across the millions of users who have run it, and it never did anything suspicious, so we're pretty sure it's safe. And in that case, it gets a positive reputation as being safe. And what Smart App Control does is checks anytime you run an app, it basically looks at the unique signature called a hash of that file, checks if there is any kind of already existing reputation on that app, and if it's known safe, it'll run. If it's known unsafe, of course, it'll block it. But importantly, if it's a brand new app to Smart Screen that's never been seen before, it will default to blocking it. It'll say, we're not really sure what this app is, so we're going to block it just to be safe. Now, there is an important exception to this where even if it's new and unknown, if it's signed with a trusted certificate, it's called, usually big companies and popular software has one of these. You have to do a lot of verification to get one. If it's signed by a trusted signature, it'll still run it. So this means that most popular software, especially ones by big companies, even if it's brand new, they immediately just released it and there's no data about it, you'll still be able to run it. So there's not as many false positives as you might think. Now, if it's unknown and it's not signed, then is when it will block it. And for most people, like 99% of people, most of the software you run is going to be signed. So really, it's pretty much only going to be open source software that's made by small developers and stuff that is going to be unsigned. And like I said, even if it's unsigned, it will still run once it has a good reputation. And if it's a very popular open source software, then that might take less than a day. So it's not like you only are going to be able to run popular signed software. And I personally have had this on for years. And if you've used it in the past and you thought this is too many false positives and it blocked too much stuff, I would give it another go, because they definitely have improved it. I almost never get things blocked anymore, so it's really the best of both worlds. I will point out that this all works in addition to your main antivirus, so it doesn't replace it. It's like an add-on and makes it just more secure. And also, this protects you not just from EXEs, you probably know about those being apps, but also other types of files like batch scripts, PowerShell scripts, stuff like that. Really, anything that can be executed, even DLLs that other apps might run, but you don't run directly, it has reputations for those too. And this is especially important because, like I talked about in a recent video, a very popular and well-known legitimate app, CPUZ, got their website hacked, and it linked to a malicious download which had actually the real legitimate signed app in it, but they used a technique called DLL hijacking, where they put a fake false version of the DLL next to the app that it downloaded, and the app would be tricked into running the fake malicious DLL. So that's a really good example where you could have a completely legitimate, safe app, but it could be tricked into running something malicious, and this could protect you against that. Now, one thing I want to point out is if it does block something, you might be tempted to just disable it and then run it anyway, assuming it's a false positive. I would be very cautious about doing that, and I would resist the urge to just disabling it and running it anyway. That completely defeats the purpose. I would probably reach out to the developer, at least if it's a big company, and say, hey, can you maybe sign this app? Or if it's an open source software, usually you can just kind of wait a little while and it'll run anyway. You could also just run it in a Windows sandbox if you're not sure. I've talked about that in past videos. And that's sort of related to the reason why I don't believe they allowed you to turn it on if it was off originally for the longest time. And it basically was, I think, to make it so there was a consequence to turning it off. It wasn't like you could just turn it off to run something because it was blocked and then turn it right back on and you weren't even protected. It was like, well, if you can't turn it off and turn it back on, you're more likely to just leave it on. And also, I believe the reasoning was, if they didn't allow you to turn it off and then back on again, they knew that because you can only really turn it on with a fresh install, then they knew that if it was on, then it has only been basically running trusted software from the very beginning. So you could probably trust that computer was uninfected at any point. But I guess they probably realized a lot of people might want to turn this on. They don't know about the feature, but they can't. But I definitely think it is better that they allow people to turn it on at any point. Yes, of course, there's going to be people who do what they always do and just disable their antivirus and run things as admin just because they think it's a false positive, and then of course it ends up being a virus. But I think the benefit of allowing people who want to enable it to protect themselves is a lot better than theoretically protecting people who might turn it off if they had the ability to turn it back on. I think you're overall going to get a lot more protection in general across the board if people can enable it in the first place, whereas they might not have had it on at all. At least that's better. So if you didn't know about this before, or you maybe thought to try it out but you couldn't before, now is the time to just turn it on. There's really not any reason not to. And let me know what you think down in the comments. Did you try Smart App Control at some point before, but maybe there were too many false positives, but now you're going to try it again? We could talk about that all down in the comments. If you want to keep watching, next up, here's a video where I talked about that CPUZ app being hacked, and I'll put that link right there you can click on. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, definitely give it a big thumbs up. It definitely helps out with the algorithm these days in the age of AI slop. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in that next video.